Talk Bernie to me. Talk Bernie to me. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to another episode of Talk Bernie to me, a podcast brought to you by Babes for Bernie. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Kathleen Graves.
And we have a great interview coming up with Freddie duBore, an academic and a writer who lives in Indiana and is a columnist for The Observer and writes all over for places like Jacobin, Harper's, and is a very smart guy who talks and writes a lot about rhetoric and composition. So he's going to talk Bernie to us about media bias.
Hello.
Hi, Freddie duBore. It's Katie Halper.
Hi.
And Kathleen Graves.
We are very excited to talk to you about kind of a general media landscape. I don't know if you've been following the story about the elections in New York, but Kathleen and I just spoke to the lawyer who filed the lawsuit against the Board of Elections. And Kathleen, do you want to explain what we're feeling right now? Yeah, kind of incredulous. There's a lot of things that haven't been covered by the mainstream media, and we feel like we sound like conspiracy theorists, but it's actually true. The Attorney General is investigating this, and the City Comptroller is investigating this, but of course that doesn't make it an independent investigation at all. You know, I didn't even prepare our guest. I feel terrible. We're talking about media bias, and now he's going to be, like, hitched to our conspiracy theory tin hat thing. So, Freddie, we can, of course, just erase this this entire interview if you find us too crazy.
All right, no problem.
All right, good. Okay, now we got the go ahead. But yeah, the purging of voters,
120,000 in Brooklyn alone. I mean, when you look at the margins that Hillary won by, those numbers are pretty staggering.
Right. And of course, this has stopped all momentum for Bernie, and now everyone's saying it's over, including lots of my good friends and comrades. But we wanted to know if you, as someone who teaches about rhetoric and composition especially, could talk about the media bias or alleged lack thereof.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's important to say I do absolutely think that the media has had a consistent slant in this primary. I think if you look at the early days of the primary, before Bernie Sanders was considered to be a real threat to Hillary Clinton's candidacy, he was treated positively in the sense that he was seen as this kind of harmless and crazy old uncle of the Democratic Party.
On the fringe, yep.
On the fringe, and with the sort of assumption that he was not a serious candidate, which, of course, you know, there's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy to this sort of thing, which once the media decides that somebody doesn't have a real shot at the nomination, that then creates that ambient sense to the public.
Or that they can't connect with minorities. I mean, they pegged that early and ran with it hard and are continuing to.
And so, you know, nobody wants to support a candidate they think that doesn't have the chance to win. And so very often the media does a good job at sort of filtering out potential candidates before they ever even get a chance. However, Bernie proceeded to do very well in the race, and that's when the coverage shifted. Once it became apparent that he was actually a serious challenger for this nomination, the knives came out, and the media has consistently treated him with a kind of hostility that it hasn't treated Hillary Clinton. I think it's important to say that this is not a conspiracy. Like, it's not like various media entities are calling each other up and sort of saying, we got to get Bernie Sanders.
Right.
The way that it works is that, but you know, the establishment media is part of the establishment, and it has certain inherent biases in the way that it looks at the world. And those biases hurt a candidate like Bernie. It doesn't take a conspiracy for them to be opposed to him. The corporate media is part of the corporate world. It reflects the interests and the desires of the 1%. And that is precisely who the Sanders candidacy is threatening.
Right. So we talked about this before, the crazy, coincidentally, you know, what was the on Becoming Anti-Bernie, we talked about that viral Medium article, which was coincidentally written by a lawyer who defends hedge funds.
Right.
Which is, hopefully Bernie will be able to recover from that terrible attack from someone who should have been his loyal base, right? The one woman's shocking journey becoming anti-Bernie. I've been getting a lot of pushback when I talk about this from people who say, no, Hillary's so hated, she's so reviled, she's the victim of sexism, which there is sexism, but the idea that nobody's hated more than Hillary, how can you even pretend that there's a bias? What is your response to that? What say you, sir?
Well, certainly Hillary Clinton has been the victim of vicious sexism her entire career. I think there's no doubt about that. And I think that she certainly does suffer in that regard. In this primary, right, the discussion of sexism has in many ways helped to shield her, because this primary is taking place on the left. It's a debate not just within the Democratic Party, but much of the debate is happening within the leftmost echelons of the Democratic Party. And luckily, and to our credit, in that forum, accusations of sexism carry a lot of weight. In this primary, what's worked is a sort of preemptive accusations of sexism against Bernie Sanders and his supporters in a way that has distracted from the actual policy issues. And anytime you distract from the policy issues with Hillary Clinton, you're doing her a favor, because she has so much negative baggage, right? If we're having a discussion about bros and sexism, then we're not discussing her support for the Iraq War. We're not discussing her support for the Clinton crime bill. We're not discussing her support for
the coup in Honduras.
Reform.
Sorry, what did you say?
Right.
Or welfare
we're not,
reform, right?
all these issues that we end up focusing on the things that distract from her actual record, which helps her, because her record, I'm sorry to say, is simply not very progressive.
Now, when you say that, are you aware that you just came out as a misogynist?
There is no way you can criticize Hillary without being a sexist. I mean, she's made that pretty clear.
Yeah, which is, of course, totally infantilizing and sexist in itself, because we're supposed to treat her like she's nothing but a victim.
Right. I mean, one of the problems with the way that the left debates among itself right now, and we see this totally with this primary, is that we want to take seriously accusations like accusations of sexism.
Right.
Absolutely. But the problem is that a lot of people, the way that they take these things seriously is they act like you have to presume that any individual accusation is credible even when it's not.
Right.
That ends up being just not a serious way to approach the world, and not a real way to solve sexism.
Right.
But
I mean,
in a situation like this, right, it means that when one person says that you're sexist for opposing Hillary Clinton, that carries weight even if it's ridiculous on its face.
Right. I mean, I think that there are probably lots of Nazis or neo-Nazis or KKK people out there who are offended by the claim that the Holocaust happened, right?
Right.
But we probably don't grant that a lot of... And I'm not saying... Look, I am a feminist. I feel like I hate that I have to make this disclaimer all the time, but I do. I'm a feminist. There is sexism. I think that the Paul Song thing, which I kind of can't get over, I'm just obsessed with it. That was a great example of how people totally...
And the willing misrepresentation of facts.
You can't look at what he wrote and what he said. I was there. And he's absolutely not talking about Hillary Clinton. You look at the parallel structure, he's talking about
Congress.
President and then Congress, then President and then Congress. Which is why, by the way, P.S., people keep covering it and writing that he made comments about a corporate whore. He called Hillary a corporate Democratic whore. It's whores.
Plural.
They leave off the S. Leave off the last S for savings. No, they leave off the S because they know that grammatically speaking, syntactically speaking, you can't call one person a whores.
Right.
Just a little PSA about grammar.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's a good example.
But do you have any other examples of? And again, it's have to establish there is sexism, and there's also that it does not mean that I need to support someone's policies. And also, that doesn't mean that every time sexism is alleged that it's there.
Well, she's in the instances now. It's the girl that cried wolf.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say that, but we gotta. We would be remiss if we didn't say that. You don't have to say that, Freddie, though, because you're a dude, so it may harm us.
I'm not going to say anything
okay,
on that level. I'll nod along quietly.
Yeah. Okay. No one heard that. We're cool. Can you think of any examples of kind of an apparent media bias?
Sure. Well, if you look at the Washington Post, it's one of the biggest newspapers in the world, and they have just run an insane volume of pieces that are meant to sort of chip away at Bernie Sanders in his campaign. They're very frequently sort of pitched in this, we're doing objective data journalism kind of thing, but really when you look at them, what they are is they're designed to sort of make his worldview seem ridiculous. And this is, it's a sort of a stock anti-leftist, anti-socialist perspective from a paper that represents the the opinions and the interests of the status quo. So a really good example is this guy, Philip Bump, who is a writer for Washington Post, who was produced as just a torrent of anti-Bernie Sanders pieces under the supposed rubric of data journalism. To take a really shameless example, he recently ran a piece that said, the headline was something like, Bernie Sanders claims that the average donor to his campaign pays only $27, but his own numbers contradict that, which suggests, so part of the Bernie narrative is that, he is, which is true, is that he's being advanced by a lot of people making small donations instead of large donations from corporate interests. That headline and the framing of the piece is designed deliberately to make you think that, in fact, what Bernie says when he says that he only gets $27 from his average donor, that is like wildly untrue. If you actually read to the bottom of the piece, and I mean like the literal bottom, at something like the 12th or 14th paragraph, you learn that the difference is a matter of like 87 cents.
Oh my God!
But Freddie, by the time we're having this discussion, it could be 90 cents.
Right, that's true. And I mean, it's incredibly cynical because he knows that a majority of people who click on anything on the web don't read beyond much more than the headline in the first paragraph.
Exactly.
And that's a perfect example, right? Framing a story which concludes at the very bottom technically correct information, but framing it to make it seem as though Bernie has been telling lies in a way to deliberately undermine the very effective political persona that he's built for himself.
Right. Now, and then, of course, he writes this, like, self-pitying piece about a bunch of people are mad at me or something on the internet.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that happens the most often in this campaign, which is that people in the media will do things to deliberately antagonize Bernie Sanders supporters. When those supporters get antagonized, when they react in a natural and human way to that antagonism, the media then turns around and says that they have a harassment problem.
Yeah.
So the website 538 is a perfect example of this. 538 is the data journalism. It's the Nate Sober website, and their writers have been incredibly hostile, very directly and explicitly hostile to Bernie Sanders and his supporters. The way that they justify this behavior is they'll run a piece or they'll say stuff on Twitter that is clearly designed to mock and antagonize Sanders supporters. So, for example, one of their writers loves to call them mustachioed hipsters, which is, whatever. It doesn't even mean anything.
That's redundant.
Right. Well, and then when people respond and say, hey, that's not a cool thing to say to people about a large political movement, he then turns around and says, aha, look at how harassing and unfair the Bernie Sanders supporters are. That's been a tactic that has been applied again and again and again in this primary.
But they did the same thing to Bernie actually himself when Clinton's people were about the
we have some serious questions, right? Raises serious questions, and then and then Hillary Clinton basically inferred that Bernie was unqualified, and then Bernie suggested that he was unqualified, right?
And then Bernie came out and said, "Well, let's look at record if you want to talk about qualifications." And then, dear God, the fury that rained down.
Right. Oh my God, that was such a trap.
Yeah, they've been baiting him and
I can't believe he got it went that long without. I mean, I would have gone crazy. That's why I'm not running for president, though. It's the only reason, because people have been knocking on my door. Not gonna lie. What else? Any other questions, Kathleen?
Did you want to say anything about the fact that they're paying?
Oh yeah, this Correct the Record story. So David Brock, the super PAC that is now paying people. Kathleen and I said, well, they're paying people to correct misinformation. And what we love about Bernie is that his Bernie bros, his harassers, do it for free. The other side has to pay for it. I mean, if that's not some DIY stuff. I know what I'm going to say. Sorry. Really quickly. The Bernie bro thing. This is what went on my head. Isn't it also kind of the idea that the loudest voices and the most obnoxious voices are the ones that rise to the top? It's like with comments. It's like with comments on an article. Right. No one takes the time. Usually people don't take the time to be like, that was an awesome article. Thank you for writing that.
Right.
It's the haters, right? So isn't there some of that with Bernie's people? And also they're younger. They're more online. And they also don't have the mainstream media making the points for them.
Right. Well, it's also important to point out that let's suppose that it was actually true that there was this Bernie bro problem. I mean, let's suppose that I honestly felt that Bernie had an unusually high number of harassing people in his supporters who use social media, which I don't believe for a second. But even if that were true, in a few years ago, the Census Department, the United States Census apparatus, did a large survey where they looked at how often people talk about politics on the internet. And if you are the kind of political obsessives like we are, it's easy to mistake to think that everybody is always on Twitter, always on Facebook arguing about politics. In fact, this survey found that over 75% of respondents never talk about politics online, and only 2% talk about politics every day. So we're talking about an absolutely tiny fraction of people who are out there having these political debates,
it's the other 1%.
Talking about Bernie bros, fighting with Bernie bros. It's a very small kind of media world problem, but because the media is the media, they get to represent it as a major problem, even though it's nothing but the time.
Right. And how much does the media affect? Like, how many people read the Washington Post? How much does it matter? How much is David Brock doing something wise when he funds this super PAC, which then does correct the record, barrier breakers, breaking down barriers, which is basically a Twitter, a professional troll army. I mean, how much does this matter at all?
Well, so to begin with, I would like to be on the record in saying that David Brock is a scumbag.
Okay, we'll make sure that we don't. It would be slander for us to remove it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's important to say that on the one hand, it's true what I said that social media can that influential on politics at large. But things like cable news and newspapers have a deeper impact, and they help to sort of set the agenda for the campaign. And what's happening now is you do eventually get this trickle-down effect where those stories become real stories because of how our media works. And that's where David Brock is. That's the sort of the pools that he's swimming in as well. I do think that it has a negative impact on the Sanders campaign, and I think that it's the kind of dirty tricks that we all need to get really savvy about in democracy really quick. Like, even if you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, if you don't buy anything about the Bernie Sanders narrative, you should be worried about the ways that guys like David Brock, the Tea Pocket, are able to manipulate our process and to manipulate our media when it suits their needs.
Well, to win by any means necessary, I think, is a really dangerous way to start your presidency.
Yeah, even though I kind of said that this morning on the radio
what?
About super delegates, but that's another issue. Yeah, there's not a lot of scruples, though, I would say, among some of her supporters. Right, it's just like if you care about democracy, you got to pretend that you care about that you're disturbed by Orwellian stuff, and you probably want to pretend that you care about people's voting rights being taken away.
Right. I mean, this is, the disenfranchisement question. It's one of the things that drives me crazy about American liberalism. Conservatives have been able to win victories that are well out of scope with their numbers, right? So conservatives have gotten more out of our political system than they ordinarily would just according to how many of them there are. And the way that they've been able to do that is, one of the ways is through very fierce message discipline, right? Mm-hmm. Conservatives don't sort of talk against their own interests. They will turtle up and they will defend message before they defend individual candidates. The way that liberals now are attacking concern with voter disenfranchisement, the way that they're acting like voter disenfranchisement is okay in this instance because of who it protects, is exactly what conservatives don't do. And, there's going to be a time in the near future when one of these questions is going to come up where it's a conflict between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats will try to cry foul, and Republicans will say, hey, we've got you on tape. We saw what you said when Bernie Sanders supporters were disenfranchised. Now we're going to turn your argument back against you.
Right. Right. So we have this thing online where people are like this fake argument where if you call something disenfranchisement, which is what it is literally and legally speaking, right, you are somehow equating that with Jim Crow era tactics and violence. Mm-hmm. And there's two problems with that. One is that it's the assumption that all Bernie Sanders supporters are white, which, you have these apparently woke white people making this point. And, of course, they're marginalizing and totally ignoring this Sanders supporters of color. And then it's the idea that, you can't call it this because you're somehow, like, you're disrespecting the legacy of of the civil rights movement.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But
and those just aren't credible arguments in my opinion.
Right. It's actually really embarrassing for me to watch.
Yeah.
And
it's and if they're playing with very dangerous ideas. I mean, it's just, no one who is on the left in any shape or form should be questioning voting rights. Like, that should be an absolutely non-negotiable part of our project.
Right. Yeah, it's really embarrassing. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Freddie, for this insight into the media bias that apparently doesn't exist or only exists in Bernie's favor and against Hillary.
Confirming what we already knew personally.
Yeah. No, we never do that, Kathleen. No, open mind. And Freddie duBore, who is a writer, academic. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye. And that was our interview with Freddie duBore. We are Talk Bernie to Me, a podcast brought to you by Babes for Bernie. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Kathleen Graves.
Please follow us and subscribe to us on Stitcher and iTunes, and we will see you next time. Talk Bernie to me. Talk Bernie to me.